we do have the guest of honor now online, which
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Every Zoom for 3 years.
No, that's all right. We're paying you so much too, Rob. It's very disappointing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, sorry, I was a bit late.
That's fine. It's actually good timing, Rob. I'm just about to run through how we're running tonight, and then we'll get straight into a bit of a Q&A and an unstructured Q&A with you, Rob. So first of all, we'll have a chat with Rob. Rob's a really experienced politician, as I'm sure many people here realise. Have a chat to him about how he sees the lay of the land and how organisation and people like ourselves can make a difference. There will be an opportunity for the people in this room to also ask Rob questions, so chuck those in the chat. Then we'll throw to Nick again. He'll run through our cost of living campaign, which is what we've produced as a tool for people in this room to go visit their MP, and that's what we're asking you to talk about. Third thing is we'll spend a few minutes drafting and maybe even sending emails to each of our MPs to set up a meeting. So that's the exciting bit. And then our website has a whole bunch of resources on it. We'll run through those for you, and obviously put forward anything else we have. So again, if you have any questions of ourselves or Rob, please throw that in the chat, and Laura will keep track of that for us. So we've said hi to Laura again. I'll throw to Nick, if that's all right. He's just going to run through why we're doing this and what the logic and the strategy is, please.
Okay, thanks so much, and thanks very much, Rob. I'm glad you could join us. And yeah, everybody here tonight. Basically, you've probably heard all day long, if you've had the news on at all, that cost of living is a really big deal. And we actually did a bit of polling recently, and maybe you were involved in helping that make that a success, where we've actually had a survey of over 1,000 families inform us as to what their experience of energy prices and other types of cost pressures have basically looked like for them in real terms. And that's actually produced a report that we've been very proud to release. It's our first report, including all of the input of parents across the country. And it proposes some solutions in there too. And we know that clean energy and energy efficiency is really going to be a massive opportunity, not just for the climate, but for cost of living relief. The trouble is, there's kind of three categories of household. There's the people who own, there's people who rent or in some kind of renting situation, and those who just don't necessarily have the capital themselves to make these changes on their own. We need to bring everybody with us, and we need to make sure that these solutions are going to be really clearly and rapidly adopted.
Lion has the best win-loss record of any St Kilda.
New one into the room. I'm muted. Thank you. Basically, we will set you up with how we can all equip you with the detail of what this situation looks like, what these solutions look like, what the asks to MPs can sound like, and how we can really create a public pressure campaign, because we didn't even predict, but it's becoming fever pitch that now is the opportunity to push for solutions to cost of living pressures that can also create clean economy futures and really help solve a lot of emissions problems. And we can push on that open door, which we're hearing loud and clear from both the federal government and state governments. And that's what today is all about. Quick straw poll. Throw your hand up if you're on video, or use a little emoji if you're able to reach the reactions on your phone. Have you met with your MP before, or have you met a politician before? Okay, some hands. So there's a good mix of experience in the room. We're all in the presence of a very experienced politician here tonight, so you can all put your hands up by the end of the night, but we will also help you reach out to your own politicians, because it's actually those MPs that get their legitimacy from us, their constituents, and we can really have really great, productive, constructive conversations that not just point towards solutions, but build relationships that are going to change their mind over the long term. So I'll throw back to yourself, Ben, and yeah, we'll get going with Rob. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Nick. So Rob Oakeshott was first elected as a National Party member in rural New South Wales in a state seat of Port Macquarie in 1996, which was when I left primary school. Just to put that in context. Sorry, Rob. He ultimately won that election in 96, and he won again in 99, after which he left the Nationals Party after disagreeing with some of the social conservatism of the organisation that he witnessed. And then ran as an independent in 2002, which he won, and then he won again in 2007. And we do need to point out that in 2007, he won an amazing 78% of votes after preferences. So you won't find many politicians who have the finger on the pulse that successfully in their electorate. After a great run as a state politician, in 2008, he resigned from New South Wales and vied for a federal seat again as independent, and he won that comfortably. So he won in 2010 and again, he won again in 2010, so 2 terms as federal politician before retiring in 2013. Certainly, Rob, I'm a Victorian by background, so Rob really came onto my radar when the Gillard government was in. He was one of the 2 or 3 kingmakers, they were called, who got to choose who made the minority government of the time. So he has a great experience of things like carbon pricing. He was also he deserves a lot of credit for his work on asylum seekers as well. Put a lot of effort into that, and that was a very hot potato at the time. So we're really thrilled and flattered that Rob is joining us tonight to share his experience. So just to kick us off, Rob, your youngest child must be in about early high school, I reckon. What do you reckon she would describe you doing as a job?
Thanks, Ben. And just as my introduction, on the back of your introduction, there was also 2 losses there as well in elections, which you kindly didn't mention. So I mentioned them because I think I learned probably more from the losses that we can talk about tonight, as much as from the good times of the wins. So, yeah, and I also would mention that it's been 10 years since I've been in elected politics, and I can see a few names in the room who are involved in the last election. So, and I think of a couple of the independent campaigns that were successful. So from a currency point of view, hopefully this does end up as a conversation that bounces around, not just, people asking me, but a general conversation, because there's a few people here who'd have some interesting insights as well. As far as my own children, yes, my youngest son actually is in primary school still. I just had my midlife crisis and went back to university and completed a medicine degree. So he is totally confused about what I do, and would, if asked, probably say I don't do much other than eat. I think that's all he sees me do at the start and the end of the day.
Sounds like a great midlife crisis, Rob.
Yeah, right. There's better ones, I can assure everyone. But it's got a nice down at the end. Yeah, but I don't have anything planned, by the way. So just fireside chat, questions, whatever you want.
Yeah, and if anyone has questions, chuck them in the chat and Laura will keep track of those for us. And do pipe up, Laura, if you think something's relevant. So, Rob, you entered politics when you were still in your 20s, after working as a staffer and a lobbyist for a few years. It's a pretty unusual career path. What drew you to it?
I was one of those people who, there's a whole batch of people. Actually, our oldest is doing the HSC right now, and I remember going through that, having no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And up to about the age of 25, I just kept saying yes to everything, as you do, and ended up just through going through a series of doors, I know it sounds a bit cute, but by saying yes, I ended up on the floor of the New South Wales Parliament, sitting next to someone who had tried and failed to get elected since 1969, which was, the year I was born. So I felt I had imposter syndrome massively at 25. But I really fell into it, I have to be completely honest about. And, right place, right time. So that's what drew me in. And I'd probably I did my apprenticeship weirdly after being elected, and got to see the insights of public policy, how it's made, and then got a bit uncomfortable with a few things I was seeing and started to make my own political choices. And that's where probably my journey started, around that early 2000s, of starting to, about 4 or 5 years in politics, started to I guess, put my foot down on a few issues that were important to me, that I thought were important to my constituents and to my state and country. And that's where it all started to get pretty interesting.
So can I dig into that? You said things that are important to your constituents. With your experience, I'd love to know, how does, like, one thing that's always struck me is that Matt Keane is the New South Wales Energy Minister, now Treasurer. Don't quote me exactly on that. And he went from being climate laggard to one of the country's absolute climate leaders, and he's from the Liberal Party. How does that happen? How does that happen in the process? What pressures can we apply to see that happen in other parts of the country?
It's a good question. I think everyone in politics is paranoid about the next election, both at a local level and those that are, mainly between the two parties, the battle to win government and to hold, the keys to the cars and the offices. And so playing on that paranoia, I think, is important. So from a Matt Keane point of view, my read on him is he reads the room. He can see that both he in his local constituency around Hornsby and his Liberal Party needed to move, and they needed a voice that was pro-climate action, as much to neutralise the issue for their party, if not to try and win a few people over, because that was missing. And I think at a federal level that is missing, and they've got a lot of work to do to make up ground. I know so many people who are Liberal or National Party voters by nature who at the moment won't go near them until they resolve their internal position on climate action. And that's a real problem for them. So they've got to work through that. And I think, to answer your question, that's the opportunity for all organisations and all groups who want to see more action on climate policy, and that is to be in the face of members of parliament, and then also to create an environment where it's okay for them to move, who are the existing members, and if it's not okay for them to move, then to bring in the next generation, either of party members or the wave of independent members that are coming in, almost despite the two major parties' position. So it's to play active politics and get in their face and be involved, which I think I'm preaching to the converted tonight.
Potentially.
Yeah, I know.
And how do you said read the room? As an MP, how do you actually know what your constituents want and what the electorate and the country as a whole wants?
It's a really good question. It's a bit of a gut read. You are out, a good MP's out and about pretty much every night or every second night, and you are working around your constituency, and you listen as much as you talk, and so you use those political instincts. I think everyone would have received a survey at some point in their mail if they live in a hardworking, member of parliament's electorate. So they use those sort of tools. And then they try and balance that against their own personal views and the party position if they're a party member. And that's where it gets a bit tricky, that sometimes you feel that your read of the room and your personal views, you're wearing that one. So I used to describe it as I couldn't wear two football jerseys at once, that I'd put on that community one that I thought was the direction I wanted to go with my advocacy. And then I had to whack this other football jersey over the top, which was the party position. And just that got to a point where I couldn't play for those two teams at once. And those that do have to juggle that, I think that's a really difficult exercise for them. But it's made easier if there's community groups within their constituency who are letting them know that it's in their best interests to try and push as hard as they can.
And what type of...
Otherwise, I was just going to say, if there's nothing in it for them at the ballot box, that lessens the priority on the list, even if they might believe it themselves. The ballot box always wins.
So have you got in your experience, a group or a person that's been particularly influential in moving your decision or educating you on a topic? How did they do that? What's that look like? I know, for example, you mentioned something about someone who came in and talked to you about the carbon tax, which was a massive issue at the time.
Yeah, and it was someone I just knew from surfing and kept running into him. And he was just this gruff character who worked for a local environmental consultancy and explained it in very simple terms that, from a carbon pricing point of view, the economic benefit overall, it's how you align economic benefit with environmental benefit, and just step through. And he was working on some practical examples of that. And it was seeing those practical examples that's, sold me, that people were getting better cattle prices because they were having more productive landscapes and running less cattle on their farms, but making more money. And it was like, what do we all make sense? And then he had half a dozen different examples. And so that being able to have, I think what's important is, even if, because this is the other thing from that time where I went from party to independent, I really noticed that it wasn't until I was an independent that I realised how many people I weren't talking to, that there were so many people who weren't comfortable coming into the door to have conversations, who were then comfortable when I wasn't aligned. And I know tonight's not about, one party or whatever, but I do think regardless of what your view is of your local member and whether you vote for them or not, I think it's really important that you get over your own voting barriers and engage with them, because they will really appreciate that. And that's that's the environment where you can potentially see change.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I met my local member, who's now the shadow climate minister in the Sunshine Coast, when I was living there. And I just got the impression that I was on a different planet to him, like things I was saying, like, but gas is expensive. And everyone he spoke to obviously didn't think gas was expensive, and I was the outlier. So yeah, it's interesting they have that selection bias.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry, after you.
Oh, all I was going to say is, because if you don't engage, they will just engage with their own little crew of supporters, and that's how they form their view of what their electorate's thinking, and it's completely skewed. So to provide that ballast is really important, and hopefully enough people are then doing that then they'd start to, as I said before, read the room that they're on the wrong side of history.
And so how do you think, as parents, and there's 30 or 40 people in this room tonight, what's the best way we can show that we have like this huge momentum, this groundswell of support for us? Is it just face to face and showing them the data? What would convince you if you weren't otherwise believing that?
Yeah, look, I always loved the one pager. And so you've made that fantastic report. If you can get that down to the very simple one pager that everyone agrees on, as to something to hawk around all the different members of parliament. But then it's eyeball them, and it's meeting people in parliament's a terrible place to do it. And so I'm not sure where everyone's based, but just picking up the phone or walking into the local electorate office, meeting the staff, who you probably see around the community anyway, so you can continue to say hello to them when you see them around town, but know those staff, book in an appointment and sit down and have a chat. And most members of parliament will be up for that, even if they disagree with your position. They want to engage. And then B, I think there's a powerful message in this group in particular, and that is what every member of parliament thinks they're doing is working on the long-term interest of the country, the next generation. So there's plenty of rhetoric around that, which is your ticket of entry into making sure you secure a meeting. And I don't, some people, I actually think it'd be nice if you took kids along, not necessarily to get them to talk, but just to get the MP to see them. And then the other option is whether, I was thinking about this the other day, organise almost park meetings. And so you say, look, I've got a dozen families who are going to meet on this morning down at this park, the local swings, and we'd love you to come along and just have a cup of coffee, and then meet us all and have a chat and really try and downplay the confrontational nature. And, it's we're your constituents. We've got particular views. We want to know what yours are, and we want to work with you. But you better listen to what we say. That's sort of the implied message without having to be said.
So it's less about arguing and being a guru in some obscure climate policy, and more just being friendly, holding a relationship.
Most definitely. Yeah. And even if they are, even if you completely disagree with their policy positions, they are your local members. So in a representative democracy, they're your voice. And I think it's also an important marker that, if you are going to stand with someone else, like, you're giving them the opportunity to stump up on your behalf. And then if they don't, you're completely within your rights to go a different direction when the election does come around. And I think it's more powerful when you can say, we tried and this guy didn't listen, so we've had to go a different direction. And I think, ideally you would love them to come along with your position and it's all easy. But if they're not, what you've done is laid the groundwork for a legitimate campaign that looks for alternatives.
Yep. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Can I change topic? You sit on the advisory board of Climate 200, which is the main funding source for many of the teals that rocked our political world early in the year. How do you think those teals and any future teals are shaping the future of politics in Australia?
I think they're making a huge difference. I think it's a moment in time that will only be, I don't think we've reflected on it as significant as it is. To break into the two-party structure is so difficult. And I think what has happened, like I always used to say, the hardest part of being an independent was getting elected. And then it was a much better way to represent a community because you had the freedom to talk with anyone and draw conclusions based on the public interest, the original model of democracy. But the hardest part was that 6 to 8 weeks before the election where you just got financially blown out of the water. And so you might have had a whole heap of community sentiment, and then it would just tank because, every second ad on TV was for the main political party, and that's all funded by lobbyists of whatever groups trying to hold on to a stale policy. And so I think what the Teals have done by getting some financial support, it's kind of neutralised that stage and made it an equal contest running into the election. And so more of them have been able to get across the line, which means I think you're going to see better representation as per the original model, which is making decisions in the best interests of your constituency and your country as you read it. And they'll all make different decisions at times, but they're much purer in their decision-making as elected MPs, in my view, than, in the parties. I think what we're seeing is a government working very hard to capture the agenda of that teal momentum. So I think it's a really interesting stage leading into the next election. I think the state election, you'll see some teal, you'll see this teal type movement continue. So that'll be interesting. Watch Victoria and New South Wales state elections. And then I think in the next federal election, I don't think this wave or this moment is over. I do think alongside the Greens in the Senate, there's this other force that's now emerged. And it is very much centred around a frustration that we need to do more for the next generation on climate action. And that's right at the heart of, I think, what, your group's all about.
Yeah, fantastic. So I could talk about this for hours, but we only have minutes. Laura, can I throw to you? You've been collecting some, I hope, fantastic questions from the people in the room.
Yeah, and I just want to apologise for those who don't get to, because you've all been keyboard worries tonight. There's some great ones here, Rob. The first one's from Val. She says, "What an amazing guest. Can I ask him how we can get the carbon tax back? I'm hoping that at the next federal election or the one after, the winning party wins because they set a mandate to introduce it as the most effective means to solve the climate crisis. Or could our states introduce it as they have in Canada?"
Yeah, look, watch this space. I think at a federal level, any idea of carbon pricing, which in my view is the most sensible option, is a bit of a, it's a dead policy at the moment. That may change if economic circumstances change. But I think realistically, I don't think we're going to see anything in that space anytime soon. I don't think Labor's got it on their agenda at all. And I think that, take a bit of a political bullet if they did do it. So as much as I'd love to say I can see a path for it happening, I can't. Even though I do think it's the best policy for the nation. So you'll see me, I don't know if anyone follows my Twitter account, I continue to chip away, but I do feel like a very lonely voice out there at the moment talking about pricing carbon. It's the most efficient public policy that turns economic value into environmental value. For me, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Thanks. And Louise is asking, how do we best support independents now elected? She volunteered for Kylie Tink, so they can be, how did she support them so they can be the most effective?
Again, I think walk in their door and hello, Louise. It's good to see you. Louise is probably best to answer that more than me. Like, it's as far as, but I would say generally walk into the electorate office of those sitting MPs and say, either I was involved in the last campaign in some voluntary capacity, or I wasn't and I want to be in the next one. What can I do to help? Just throw it out there. It'll be a battle in those seats, but I think what's equally as interesting, if not more interesting, is the seats that will now be contested, where they're, like the seat next door with Nicolette Boulay. I think they're really interesting seats now, which were never on the radar of politics. So those candidates who got close but missed out, if you live on the North Shore of Sydney, I think they're ones to also get in touch with and say, how can I help? Because I think they're the ones who don't have that, there's a bit of a saying in politics, incumbency is king. There's a lot of resources that go now that those elected MPs are across the line. They'll have a hard battle, but they've got that authority of office and some support to really build a big network. It's those ones that just missed out that still are just flying solo, and they really need people on the ground more than anyone. And they're winnable seats. And I think 3 or 4 more good, strong, independent candidates, climate action agenda, it flips the dial tenfold. And so I think that's a really important strategy to start thinking about for the next election, because regardless of who the party of office is, they've still, and you saw it last night, they've still got the fossil fuel industry very much, they're trying, it's a very close relationship.
Mm-hmm.
With a lot of subsidies that go to the fossil fuel industries to keep doing what they're doing.
Yes. Granton has asked, I'm in the federal seat of Clare, Nationals held. Our sitting member tends to say what he thinks we want to hear locally, but then votes always with the party, dominated by fossil fuel advocates and the like. What's the best way to hold him to his word? So it's a particular New South Wales National Party thing where
And I see it up the North Coast as well. People are green in their electorates and brown in Sydney or Canberra, is kind of the saying, and they change their positions. And so I would very much go and see that local member in person, either in a small group or individually, it doesn't really matter. But I would take the comments off the floor of Hansard, and you can just go to the Australian Parliamentary website, type in Hansard, and then they've got a really simple drop-down box where you can type in your local member, and you can get, and then write in, you know, the search engine climate, and you can get everything that that person has said on that topic. And, you know, you can say, well, you know, is this what you believe that you've said on the floor of the Parliament? And, you know, start the conversation that way and try and break that, you know, saying one thing in the local papers to try, because they know that's what the audience wants, and then running down to Sydney or Canberra and saying the complete opposite.
That's a great tip. Xavier's asking, what's more convincing in a meeting with a lobby group like us? Having a lot of people backing a certain position, say demonstrated through a petition, or a personal story with a good reasoned argument?
Yeah, probably the second. Like, petitions are a dime a dozen in politics, and they're kind of treated as a form letter or a form petition. So there's a lot of effort that goes into getting names on petitions and not a lot of return. I would put my money on the good story and a well-argued case, and even more so, I would put my money on personal connection. So try and build relationships at a personal level with your member of parliament and their staff. And I keep mentioning the staff. I think the staff are really critical in an electoral office. They can be your greatest advocates behind the door. And, you know their kids' names for a parent lobby group, know the MPs, where they go to school, know who they're married to or who their partner is, and just know a bit about who they are. And without being stalkerish and creepy, just, do your homework and try and connect at that personal level. And then weave in the story about, and you can almost have some banter with it if they totally disagree, and just keep saying, I'll get you one day, or I'm going to make sure you change your mind. And it's important you change your mind if you want to get re-elected. And they've all heard, every single member of parliament has heard the worst things ever said about them. So you cannot offend a member of parliament. Everyone, it always used to surprise me how polite people are to their local members. And I'm not saying walk in and be rude, but I'm saying walk in with confidence that your position is right and advocate for it.
Yeah. Great advice. Catherine says amazing insights and discussion already, and that was quite a while ago. Thank you, Rob. I know that the focus of tonight's on meeting with your elected representative, but how much do they actually pay attention to other contact, like emails to the office?
Staff normally are dealing with the emails. So again, they're probably treated as a bit like a petition and you'll test your local members, send them something, and more than likely you're going to get a form response. Those 2 or 3 paragraphs that say, thank you, I've referred it to the minister and please stay in touch. That's the kind of thing you're going to get back, and you're always left in doubt whether they even saw it and signed it off. So I'm big on the face-to-face, because what that does is that separates, anyone from around the world can lobby you by email now. Or send you a petition. But if you're walking in from down the road to the local member's office, there's some sort of connection in the place you live, that's just streets ahead of every other option.
Yeah, great one.
They're scared they're going to run into you in the local shopping centre. So they want to just live locally and all be happy and peaceful. And so disrupt that a bit in a nice way.
Awesome advice. So I've only got time for one more, so I'm sorry for those that we haven't got to yet. But Emily said she's flipping this a little bit. How do you think we are best to encourage others to actively involve themselves in democracy? lots of people just don't engage.
Yeah, that's the $64 million question. And I think you can hold up again, without necessarily advocating for the teals or the independents, you can demonstrate that by getting organised, you can make a difference. And so you can use that group of, the Climate 200 movement, working with really quality independents candidates who came from community groups and pitched their case to Climate 200 and then got elected. You can make a difference. I think that's the significance of the last election, is it's not just two sides go to war anymore. That if there is good, strong community engagement and, people being involved, things can happen. And things can happen in any seat. There's no such thing as that safe seat anymore. And so that can be a conversation with neighbours and people you're in touch with who are pretty apathetic. You can say, if you're interested, get involved and we can do something fun here and make a difference.
Awesome, Rob. Thank you for your wisdom and advice there. Thank you. I think that's all that we've got time for in terms of a Q&A, Ben. Thanks,
And
Rob.
good. Yeah, that's fine. And just good luck with it all, guys, and happy to help in any way possible. I think you're a really important crew and can continue to make a big difference over the next couple of years. You're right in the middle of it. So good luck.
Thank you so much, Rob. On behalf of all of us at Australian Parents for Climate Action and all of our members, we're very grateful for all the work you've done to date. You're a living legend and you're continuing to do so. And we're really grateful for the contribution you've made to climate action over the last decades and what we're going to do together going forward. So thank you. Thanks for joining us tonight. And thanks for bringing your expertise and experience. Anytime.
Seriously, anytime. And good luck with it all.
Appreciate it. We'll take you up on that. We will take you guys through just a quick explanation of how we think a good play could be in terms of how to engage politicians and MPs on the cost of living and energy crisis, energy prices, and so on. And I'll take you through some slides. But we'll also have a little bit of time later on for contacting our MPs and coming back together. Thanks, Ben, for starting that off. Got a very limited amount of time and there's a lot in the report. So I do encourage you to jump online and check out our website. You'll find our report. And this report, I say it's our report, it's all of our report. You may have contributed to this yourselves, in which case I'm very grateful. Thank you. We don't have the big bucks to do huge market research. And so the fact that we did this on a shoestring is amazing. And we've had already some really great feedback from a lot of MPs. What I will say though is, this is a really good token or representation of the kind of group that we are and what we can do because we are able to reach amazing networks quite quickly through the existing social fabric that we're a part of. So you're happy to flick through there to the next slide. A little bit about the survey. See a picture of Jasper down in Adelaide. We asked a range of questions. We got over 1,000 parents or 1,000 families. And we've got a really interesting mix. It's notionally nationally representative, but it doesn't break down into the states. It only gives us some of the trends, but those trends were still really instructive. So I'll tell you a little bit about that. Next slide. Basically, the key takeaways everyone's hurting. It's psychological, like it's stressful and it's inducing anxiety. And that's actually part of the story that when I've been talking to MPs, I can show them the numbers, but I can also say, look, here's one mum and here's what they said to me. And they live in your constituency. We're also noticing that there's like a big trend between those who can access solutions or not feel so much cost of living pressure and those who are feeling more cost of living pressure, usually on lower incomes or renting, and they don't have access to energy price solutions. And that's a big part of what we discovered in this report and what we want to address. Next slide, please. Here you'll sort of see, where people were saying they were feeling those pressures depending on the level of income that they were in these 4 categories or 3 categories. And yeah, there's definitely a trend where those on lower incomes are feeling pressure more acutely. And that's only going to exacerbate. This was a poll conducted during winter, and we thought, oh, look, cost of living is a problem in winter. It's going to continue to be a problem. That's very clear to everybody now. We thought that was hopefully going to get better, but it's actually not going to get better quickly. So you can see that there. One of the things we also found, though, was although 95% of families were hurting, 95%, same number again, were coming back and saying, look, they would really like and favour support to be able to make energy solutions more accessible. And I think that's something that a lot of politicians are really latching onto now. Thank you. You can see there a little bit about some of the qualitative side of things. And I think, it came up earlier, but stories matter. Actually, stories are almost more persuasive than facts. And together, they're even more powerful. And so I really hope this can be useful in that regard. But you might also have your own experiences or people in your community who you might be able to talk to about their story. Next slide, thanks. So the solution is, look, there's no silver bullet other than just handing out cash for what is going to be the nexus between the energy price and energy crisis that we're experiencing at the moment due to a range of factors, but not least of all, insufficient policy change over the last decade and dependence on fossil fuels, exposure to global markets, price crisis being driven by events like the war in Ukraine, and a lack of resilience in our own system because we've just been sitting on our laurels. I think what we can say is going to make a really big difference are 2 huge plays. One, energy efficiency. It sounds a little bit boring sometimes, but it makes a big difference and it's got a big bang for buck. And the other is transitioning to electrification, upgrading to clean energy appliances, getting away from household gas and actually making sure people have efficient appliances in their homes. Those 2 things could change the entire energy system in Australia if it was done for all homes. And that's why we really want to make sure all homes are included. And we know that it's going to have a huge cost-saving potential. As soon as that financial outlay has been delivered, the cost savings come back straight away. In fact, I was talking to someone at Rewiring Australia, Saul Griffith's outfit earlier in a week, and they were showing me that over the course of about 10 years, an average family would save about $42,000 if they upgraded all of their appliances and transport, which is enough to pay for the whole thing. But people that just don't have that ability up front, so we want to make sure everyone's included. Cracking on, don't want to carry on too much. Here you can see, there's going to be big differences in electric vehicles, especially electric vehicles charged on solar with a battery. That's the future. It's a future which many families are already adopting. We're seeing it's 1 in 3 households have solar. We've got 1 in 40 households have a battery. We've got around 2% of the countries adopting EV. That's great. That's where households are heading. But we've got to remember not to leave others behind, because what's going to happen is increasingly that will drive an inequity gap. It will make sure that those households that can't afford it or don't have power over those decisions are locked into fossil fuels and unable to get out of that situation. It will only get worse. Another solution is on the next slide. Yeah, water heating. Heating is a big one. Transport and heating are probably the 2 biggest in terms of energy use and cost. And we know that I've recently spent a lot of time teaching myself what a heat pump is. You don't need to know, just like you don't need to know what a microwave is. It's still useful and you should have one. But now that I know, I'm even more amazed. And they do make a huge difference to the efficiency of energy use. And it's something that's really going to be a big change for all households this decade. We just got to make sure it gets delivered. And there's space heating as well. Space, water, and transport. Thanks. So our asks, look, we've got our top 5 asks, and these are definitely things that we want to make sure we're using as strong suggestions and pushes. Different governments, different MPs, different parties are going to respond to different things in different ways. They'll have different ideologies and directions that they're coming from. But everyone we've been speaking to is engaging with these in different ways, quite constructively. First one's rebates. We know it worked for solar. It can work for electrification and upgrading homes, including energy efficiency. Rebates can be very fair and they can be evenly distributed. We want to make sure that the government actually also updates its fleet, because that increases the amount of second-hand EVs in the market very rapidly. Currently, people are waiting up to a year to get an EV. In 3 years, all of the current government fleet will be going through to bid for second-hand. So we want to make sure that they support that market as well. Thirdly, we need to get households off gas, especially in Victoria, but any of those states or any of those homes that are using gas in their homes. It's not just bad for us and our health, it's really, really bad for our bills. We're exposed to global markets, and it's getting a lot more painful. It's easy to replace, but it is a little bit complicated. We want to make sure that all sides of politics are leaning in, and they're being a little bit reluctant, but I think they're all catching on. Lastly, more renewable energy in the grid means cheaper power prices in supply, and that's really important. And lastly, we do want to make sure it's fair for homeowners who are renting and on lower incomes. And that means making sure that no one's left behind, making sure that they've got access to things maybe that are means tested or at different levels. Some states are doing this in different ways. I had a conversation last week with Victorian Liberals who were trying to make it even easier for landlords to upgrade rental by announcing a policy that means that they would actually double the amount of incentive for those properties. So there are different ways of making it. Next slide. Okay, cool. I might just leave it here, but the main thing is that when we go in and talk with someone, my experience, I don't know about you guys, but I have definitely had a serious case of the whole imposter syndrome. But actually now I'm really enjoying meeting with MPs because it's relationship building. It's as important to have a constructive and relationship building event, which could lead to further opportunities for persuasion, as it is to make your key points and arguments. So do ask them as questions and try and find out what are the areas that you might be able to follow up on. I will leave it there just for time and hand back over to the team.
Thank you, Nick, and sorry for squishing in too many slides for you to talk to in the time I gave you, Rob. That comes the hands-on bit. We've heard from Rob and we've heard from Nick, and I'd really love to spend a couple of minutes if we could all fire an email to your local MP and ask them to invite them to a meeting with you. So Laura's going to throw something in the chat for us, just a link, and it's a link to an the Australian Parliament website, and I'm just going to share my screen. So what this is a very simple tool. It takes you to this website. You type in your postcode, which for me is 3078, and it comes up with a list of who your MP is, as well as all the senators in your state. And from there, it's a very simple case of clicking on the mail icon, and it'll pop up in your email app on your phone or your computer. And that's how you get the email address. So I'd love it if everyone could spend a minute doing that, and we'll grab their email address, please. Assuming we don't all have it. There are a lot of hands coming up when people said that they've met their MP before. And then, too many tabs open. Of course, if you're in Victoria, there's an election coming up, so please feel free to contact your Victorian MP because they're particularly receptive at the moment, and Laura's just thrown that chat in. Or maybe if you don't particularly want to meet your federal MP, of course, meet your state MP. They're all very important. Great. Can I ask if you found your MP's address, could you throw a hand up just so I can get a read of the room? How are we all going? I'm going to say that's most-ish people. And I reckon the other people can work it out. So Laura, the second thing we're going to do, we've got a draft email written for you. You probably have to change a few things like who it's from, the sign off and whatnot, and the name of your MP at the front. But Laura's going to throw that in the chat for us. And so there we go. We now all should have a draft email and the email address ready to go. And I'd love you all to press send as soon as we get off tonight, but I probably won't spend the next 5 minutes waiting for everyone to write their email because we have one last chore to do. So I'll just give you probably 30 seconds to have a quick read of that. And if anyone has any questions, please pipe up, and then we'll jump on to the resources we have available.
Ben, I'm having a computer malfunction. Sorry, it's not letting me copy and paste for some reason. Do you want to give it a go?
I'll have a crack. Sometimes it doesn't like just a massive text dump.
Yeah, that's it.
There we go. So everyone, that's now in a few little chat boxes.
So there's yeah, three sections there. If you copy and paste those, you should have all the text.
Got a thumbs up from Andrea. If you're on top of that, do you want to raise your hand just so I can get a bit of a read? Laura, you can't raise your hand. You've got access to the document we're working off. That's cheating. Is that mainly a thumbs up, or do we need a bit more time? Seeing a few thumbs up. All right, I'll go with that. Thank you, everyone. I'm really determined to finish on time tonight. So we've all obviously just asked you to have a meeting with your MP, which for some people here might be a bit intimidating. They may not have done it before, or they may not know exactly what to ask. And we really understand that. We're in the same situation when we meet our MPs as well. So there's a bunch of things we have available to help smooth that journey. First, and certainly not least, is our community organizer, Laura, and all the local community groups we have. So say hi again, Laura. I hope we've all seen Laura if you haven't already. Many hands make light work in this, and going with other people, particularly if they're more experienced, can make this a lot better. So if you haven't connected to any fellow parents in your area, then please see if there's a local group for you to connect to. And Laura, if you could just throw that link into the chat, please. We do find this all works a lot better when people work in a group, and it just takes some of the weight off. The second thing is we do have a page on our website, which is specifically for meeting your MP. I'm just going to very quickly run you through that. So you go to resources, and then there's a thing on meeting your MP. It has some simple steps to follow. So if you like process and steps and checklists, then this is really useful for you. It has what Nick ran through and what our asks are, and potentially how you can go a bit more detailed in the asks. There's also the report itself, which really gets stuck into the detail. It's like a 20-page report or something like that. The other thing, if you're a super detailed person, there's a detailed meeting checklist here, which covers everything you could possibly think of. It's very slightly outdated because it's used for the federal election campaign, but please don't hold that against us. And last but not least, we didn't talk a whole lot today about the actual meeting itself and what that looks like, and like what you should wear and how you should organize it and all those type of really detailed things. When the people that make this organization, you're all very switched on, proficient individuals. I don't think you'll need that. I think you'll be fine. But if you like that detail, we ran a separate Meet Your MP training session late last year, I think, Nick, was the date, with a lady called Sue Dwyer, and she's run a really great session there. Goes about 40 minutes, and she went through all the detail, a whole bunch of really useful tips. So if you're feeling a little bit intimidated, I highly recommend you have a look at that. Again, this is from when we were running election stuff, so you can skip all that gumph, I think is the word, by starting the video at 8 minutes in and stopping at 48. So it's about 40 minutes. And I thought Sue had a lot of really good content. Lost my run sheet, but that's okay. So last but definitely not least, we have printed out a pile, or sorry, we are shortly printing out a pile of these reports, so you can rock up with your A4 booklet, and we do have that one pager that Rob was talking about. So if you are going to go meet your MP, please let us know and we will mail you out a report so you can take that in person. Of course, if you want to, you can also just print it off the website, but we'd love to be able to help out like that. It's being professionally printed. Laura, if you could chuck in your email address, because Laura's managing that for us. And I think that's it. So I feel that was pretty jam-packed. We've just missed the 9 o'clock, so apologies, I tried. But look, I really want to say thank you everyone for attending. If you're still writing your email or you want to have any questions of myself, Laura, or Nick, then please stay on. And if you're holding a meeting, just remember we are really here to provide guidance and assistance and any support we can. And otherwise, we really look forward to hearing back from how your meeting went, and we wish you all the best of luck and thank you for spending your Wednesday night with us.